Hello everyone, and welcome to Average Joe Video. My name is Joe, and well, fall is obviously just about over and winter is upon us very shortly. So I thought it would be a great idea just to go over the basics of checking the fluids on your Kubota BX series tractor. Now, I'm aware that there's a lot of videos out there that demonstrate how to perform the service work, such as oil changes, the hydraulic fluid change, etc. But as I looked at it more, I realized, what if you're a brand new owner to the Kubota BX series and you just want an overview of what fluids do I need to check? I don't even know where to check the fluid, how to check the fluid. And that may seem simple for those of us that have been around tractors for quite a while, but for those of us that might be brand new to tractors in general or to Kubota tractors in general, that's my goal, is to make this that it's helpful. So in this particular case, I'm going to be demonstrating everything on my Kubota BX23S. Now, if you have a Kubota BX series, everything that I'm about to show you is going to be the same general principles. I'm not going to really go over capacities because, again, that's going to vary depending on the specific engine in your machine. But generally speaking, keep in mind that this is a BX23S. So if you have a BX80 series tractor, and if you don't know if you have an 80 series tractor, if your hood design resembles the hood design on this one, then you have an 80 series tractor, then this is going to be exactly what you would need to be looking for. But once again, the earlier models are going to follow a similar process. So what I want to do is I want to go through this step by step. And if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to the channel, because I like to bring you a lot of content related to Kubota tractors, lawn mowers, outdoor power equipment, and just generally anything that applies to everyday people. So the first thing we're going to do is we are going to check the engine oil. All right, and we can do that by obviously raising the hood. And the first thing that I want to do is I want to move this guard in front forward so that the hood does not hit it. And then I'm simply going to move this latch here, which is going to release the hood latch. And now we have access to checking the engine oil as well as the coolant. And we're going to get to the coolant here in just a minute. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to locate the dipstick. Now, if you're used to automotive dipsticks, usually they have a different color that they stand out, but the top of this dipstick right here is the same gray as the engine, so it may be kind of hidden at first. And you just want to take the dipstick out and you want to completely wipe that free of all the oil. And I didn't mention this earlier, but you should be working on a level surface. If you're not sitting level, that can definitely throw off the amounts that you're reading on the dipstick. The level could be off. So we're going to just clean off the dipstick like I did. And remember, your goal in doing this is you want the oil to be between those two holes on the dipstick. All right, and obviously the top hole is the max. The bottom hole is the absolute minimum. So if you're down at the bottom, you should be adding some. And again, whenever it comes to adding oil, just do it gradually. And I'm going to show you where to do that here in just a moment. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to reinsert the dipstick the whole way. Then I'm going to pull the dipstick out like so. And you can see that this oil is actually perfect. It's actually just a hair above that top hole on the dipstick. I'm not sitting 100% level. I may be turned a little bit, but that's not going to hurt anything. That's obviously just about right on the mark, so I'm not concerned about that. Avoid just taking the dipstick out and taking a reading off of it without wiping it off first. So that looks good. So that takes care of the engine oil. Now, what should you do, obviously, if the oil is not at an acceptable level? Where do you actually add the oil? So if you take a look at the engine, you will notice on the very top is the fill cap. And that's this cap right here. Okay, and you'll notice that you can actually just obviously unscrew that. It even has imprinted on the top oil, and then that's where you would add any additional oil if it is needed. Now, if you are wondering what type of oil should I add if my engine is low on oil, obviously you want to be mindful of the weight. I'm not here to discuss different brands. Everybody has their own preference. I personally prefer using genuine Kubota fluids. Oftentimes you'll find that the difference in price is very minimal, but here's what I'm using is I use 15W40. That's the weight that I always run in my unit. And again, that's going to depend on where you're living, what the climate is like. 15W40 has always been my choice, so that's what I run in the diesel engine. You just want to make sure that whatever you are purchasing fluid-wise, that it is meeting the requirements. And you can see a bunch of different requirements listed on here, but you want to make sure that it is for diesel engines, and it will actually tell you that on there. It'll say it's for gasoline and diesel. It'll specify that, so just be aware of it. So that's all we would have to do, is use a funnel obviously and add some of that to the appropriate level. Again, you want to add it gradually. You don't want to do all that at once. Okay, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to check the coolant. This reservoir right here is the coolant reservoir. So if you notice on there, there are actually two different marks on the reservoir. So you will see that it is marked H, and then the bottom one is L. You just can't see it because of my hydraulic lines for my plow. So here we have H, here we have L. The only thing that you need to be aware of is you need to make sure that the coolant is between those two marks. It does not have to be to the H mark when the engine is cool. And obviously I would not run it at the L mark. I would bring it up some, but as long as it's between those two marks, you are fine. Keep in mind that when you run the engine, the temperature of the engine is going to affect the coolant. So you're going to see that coolant level fluctuate. So that's totally normal. That's all you want to do, is make sure that the coolant is at the correct level, and that would be between those two lines. Now, the next question is, what do you do if you are low on coolant? It's actually very simple. You are simply going to remove this yellow cap here at the top of the reservoir, and then you are going to bring the coolant to the appropriate level. Now, I do want to warn you that when you add coolant, it does not take much to move it between L and H. There's not a lot of fluid there. So keep in mind that there's a very small amount. You don't want to go grab a gallon jug of coolant and start dumping it in there and assume that, you know, it's going to take a lot, because and as long as you're seeing coolant in the reservoir and it's just on the L mark, it's not going to take much at all to bring it in between those two marks or bring it up to H. Which brings up my next point: what coolant should you use? So that's what we're going to talk about next. Okay, so if you do need to add coolant, you should be adding a 50/50 pre-diluted antifreeze coolant. In this case, I just happen to have a gallon of the Kubota branded coolant. This is your basic ethylene glycol. So to put that into normal terms, it's basically the green stuff that you would find at the auto store. There's nothing fancy about it. The only thing that you need to remember is that it has to be a 50/50 mix. It should already be pre-diluted. So that's all you got to remember as far as the coolant goes. So it's pretty straightforward. Okay, so that does it for the fluids that we need to check under the hood. So all you have really under the hood that you're checking is you're checking your engine oil and you're checking your coolant. So we can go ahead and we can close the hood. We'll put the guard back up. And next what we're going to do is we're going to check the transmission fluid. Okay, so in order to check your transmission fluid, you're actually going to pull the dipstick that's back here. So that's this dipstick right here. Okay, we're going to remove that entirely, and we're going to wipe that off. Now, if you have a lot of debris around it, you might want to take a rag and wipe around it. I just checked this the other day, so it's not too bad. And then what I'm going to do is go ahead and insert the dipstick entirely until it clicks. You'll feel the click when the O-ring is seated. You're going to remove it, and then if you take a look at the dipstick, in this particular case, it is a bit tough to see because the fluid is clear and it's not that old. You can see it's dripping down there. I am actually right here with the cross hatches. So as long as you are in the cross hatches, you are good. Now, if you're at the bottom, you may want to add a little bit, but you don't have to have it the whole way to the top for it to function. That's basically the way that it's set up. Okay, so that's really all there is to it. We're going to go ahead and reinsert that. Now, be aware that the transmission fluid is the same as the hydraulic fluid. So you'll hear people say, oh, I need hydraulic fluid. I'm checking my hydraulic fluid, or I'm checking my transmission fluid. They are one and the same, so just make sure you're aware of that. Now, what do you do if it needs fluid? Obviously, you have to add it, but what fluid should you add? That's what we're going to talk about next. Okay, so if you need to add fluid to the transmission, it is extremely important that you use Kubota branded fluid, and specifically it calls for Super UDT2 Universal Trans Hydraulic Fluid. Do not go to your local farm supply store and buy the cheapest hydraulic fluid that you can find, because it is not going to meet Kubota's specifications. This is one area that you do not want to cheap out on. This is not like the engine oil where you don't have to use Kubota branded engine oil, or the coolant where you don't have to use Kubota branded coolant. You need to make sure you're using the Kubota branded Super UDT2 Trans Hydraulic Fluid. Now, I just happen to have a 1 gallon container, and I have a quart as well. But again, keep in mind, this is something that you do not want to cheapen out on. These are not cheap, but it's not like it's something where you're going to be adding a whole lot all the time. Otherwise, you've got a problem. Obviously, if you're changing it, you're going to use quite a bit, but you're not changing it all the time either. Okay, so the last fluid on the tractor that we need to check is the front axle fluid. Okay, and that's why you're going to notice there is a dipstick right here, so I can simply remove that. I'm going to follow the same process. I'm going to wipe that clean. I'm going to go ahead then and reinsert it, pull it out to check it, and you can see very clearly. I know it's extremely clear. I apologize, it's hard to see, but you want it to be no higher than this mark right here. And you can see there's fluid dripping off. It actually looks good. I know that's hard to see on camera. I apologize for that. So you just want to make sure that your front axle fluid is at the correct level. Now, on that note, I will tell you that Kubota is notorious for having the front axle fluid level low from the factory. And I'm assuming that's because they can't work all the air out of it, but they do tell you, even if you had to have it changed, that you should obviously be checking it periodically, and then you're gonna have to top it off. But my advice to you, don't think, oh, I have a new tractor, I don't need to check the front axle, it'll be good. Check all your fluids, be mindful of it, and bring it to the attention of your dealer if you see there's an issue. So what fluid should you be using? Well, it turns out you have two different options for the front axle fluid. The first option for the front axle fluid is to use the Super UDT2. That's actually what I'm using in the front axle. That is what it comes with from the factory. So if you're interested in putting in the same fluid as it came with from the assembly line, then you're going to be using the Super UDT2. If you look in your owner's manual, you do have the option of using an 80-90 weight gear oil. So that's an option as well. And you can find 80-90 weight gear oil at just about any automotive store. Anywhere that sells fluids like that, you're going to be able to find it. Why do I stick with the Super UDT2? Well, mainly for two reasons. The first reason is that I already have it. So it's easy because I already have it on hand. And the second reason is because that's what was in there from the factory and I'm adding to it. So you don't want to add the gear oil to it if you already have the Super UDT2 in place. You would obviously want to drain the Super UDT2 and then put the gear oil in. I wouldn't recommend mixing the fluids. Okay, so that wraps up how to check the fluids on your Kubota BX tractor. If you haven't already, please smash that like button and consider subscribing. Also, if you are a new Kubota BX owner, I would be very interested in what you find to be the most confusing part or challenging part to understand as a new tractor owner. So if you'd leave that in the comments below, that would be great. And hopefully some other viewers that are more experienced, or even myself, I'll be able to comment on the early commenters and provide you with some insight. So thank you for watching.